Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Levine, the CEO here at Roy Morgan. Before I introduce the first speaker, let's pause for a moment to acknowledge and honour the traditional custodians of this land, whose enduring connection to country, culture and storytelling has illuminated pathways of wisdom and wonder for countless generations. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and embrace the spirit of their extraordinary legacy. So let's get started. Retail media. Two words that seem to cause equal measure of excitement and confusion, and for some of us, perhaps terror. It's the hot topic that everyone's talking about, yet nobody really seems to fully understand. But throughout my career, I've applied a sort of simple tool when something seems complicated or I don't understand it. I try and condense it to its simplest form. So for me, retail media looks like this. Retailers are becoming publishers. They've got inventory, advertising space to sell, and they need advertisers to buy it. But we mustn't just see retail media through a media lens. And today, we're really privileged to have Scott Browning with us, a retail guru who insists on flipping that perspective upside down, or perhaps right side up, and tackling retail media from a retailer's point of view. Now, I've known Scott and Roy Morgan as a company. We've known Scott for many years. And if there's anyone who can cut through the complexity and turn chaos into clarity, it's him. Scott's retail pedigree is unmatched. As marketing director at JB Hi-Fi from its infancy in 2004 until 2015, he wasn't just along for the ride. He was the change agent, responsible for brand strategy, e-commerce, digital innovation, and even store design. And when he resigned, a global consumer electronics vendor said Scott Browning is unique. He's most probably the best retail marketing director in Australia. He ran rings around Harvey Norman and was responsible for creating the uniqueness of the JB Hi-Fi brand. Before shepherding JB Hi-Fi from small music retailer to Australia's powerhouse retail brand that it is today, Scott honed his marketing skills at Eastman Kodak, holding key leadership roles across Australia and New Zealand, and collaborating on global strategies. Before Kodak, he ran his own very successful retail business. And Scott's knack for spotting trends, simplifying complexity, and delivering sharp insights is precisely why we're all here today. Expect clarity, no pressure, Scott. Expect clarity, deep insights, and certainly an eye-opening look at retail media from the perspective of a retail innovator. Our second speaker, almost equally fabulous, will take us from technology to precision targeting and brand love, from capability to customer. Because precision like that only works if we aim it at the right customer. After Scott, Dr. Ross Honeywill, creator of the Neo consumer typology and longtime Roy Morgan collaborator, will unpack who the Neos are, why they matter and why they matter more than ever, and how this future-shaping mindset is already reshaping the consumer economy. But now, please join me, really this time, in welcoming Scott Browning.
Thank you. I'm coming to you from a retailer's perspective tonight. I know there's some retailers in the room, some very good retailers, but predominantly there's a media audience here as well. And then, as Michelle said, that's retail and media. That the two things have never really gelled very well. So as a retailer, I don't really know much about media. I've got to suffer a bit from Dunning-Kruger effect, I think. I know a little bit, so I'm an expert. But media masters would know different. But from the retail side of things, if you're a retailer and you're still in business, then I count you as a successful retailer. And successful retailers, they have great visions for their brands or their business. They're very resilient and they have this sort of capability to adapt to countless changing circumstances. But that sort of approach puts them in a situation sometimes where they feel they're getting further away from their strategy. But the key for retailers is capability. And there are probably 6 critical capabilities that you could sort of line up for predominantly bricks and mortar retailers that I think that sort of all work together to get strategic advantage. What are the capabilities or the differentiating capabilities that retailers must have in order to succeed? And they've got to put them all together. A capability is anything that involves sort of systems and processes and structure and people and skills to put it all together. But when you start throwing multiple capabilities at a system, they've all got to work together. Now, ordering stationery is a capability. And if you do it to a high level of excellence, that's great. But there are some things that retailers have to really focus on that separate them from their competition. And whether that's an Amazon or another bricks and mortar retailer, the things that come together very quickly are those 6 critical capabilities. Trust is sort of a fuzzy word or a sort of something that's a bit nebulous, but it isn't. It's very simple. That trust is a function of a business's intent, its integrity, the results it gets, how it focuses on what customers really want, and this sort of thing in the middle that can be summed up as authenticity. But authenticity is easy to understand in retail. It's where what you say and what you do don't contradict each other. And that's where retailers are constantly talking about loyalty and these type of things, but loyalty doesn't really exist. It's all about trust. And that trust is on loan from the consumer. And we've seen over the years how brands can go from up here to down here in trust on the basis of what was on loan has been taken away. And so that is a capability. It's very difficult. You need all sorts of governance and processes. The other one of superior store network, that also talks to everything that goes behind the scenes, like logistics, inventory management, property. Superior store network is about putting all those things together. And competing. There's no point going into a great looking store and being out of stock of a product. That's where retailers fall over. And then strategic customer focus is an area that is also misunderstood, I think, a lot by retailers that are very tactically focused and mass market focused. But retailers are able to sort of map the terrain and then focus on audiences that really matter to their growth are the most successful. But you can't just pick 1 or 2 of these and say that's what I'm going to compete on. It's a system. And that system sort of has to work together. You just can't throw something in to the middle of this and say, well, that's going to work. It needs to work within the structure, the systems, the processes, the people. These are the things that have to work. So you can't just come along with something like retail media and say, oh, we're going to raise all this revenue from advertising and then have it throw into this system. So it's all got to be consistent with what your capabilities are. And I'm very sympathetic to retail CEOs because they tend to squirm a lot and they seem very uncomfortable when they're talking about strategy. And that's because I think they suffer from something I call strategic hemorrhoids. And there are lots of things that are bothering them at the moment that even though they have a great result, they've just put out a great half or a great quarter, there's great comps and that, they're constantly going, oh, I'm still worried about that thing over the next horizon, the next 3 to 4 years, the next 5 to 7 years really bothers retail CEOs in terms of you think about a business the size of Woolworths or Coles, it's just incredible what they have to deal with in terms of those strategic bottlenecks. And right now today, probably the vast majority of bricks and mortar retailers in Australia are wrestling with a few problems around how do I take all this data that I've got and turn it into actionable insights? How do I use my media environment to sort of action those insights as well? And what's going on with AI, inverted commas? And how do I sort of use my strategic advantage? All these capabilities, how do I put that together? But the real question is profitable growth. That's even looming larger. Where do I go to from here? How do I get real profitable growth? How do I acquire more customers? How do I penetrate the market better with my strategies? Because just focusing on your existing customers, it's not going to grow your business. So you're constantly looking at new business opportunities. And then there's this thing on the outskirts now, which is Amazon, or what I call Amazon 3.0, which I'll go into a little bit. And then what is the future of physical stores in this whole environment? So all these things are clogging up the system in terms of capability. And unless these things work their way through, retailers will be at a disadvantage. So I'll just sort of deal with where I see the threats first. And the first one is agentic AI and how that is going to interact with what is essentially the current burden in online shopping for most consumers. But really, it's hyper-personalisation, very predictive commerce, immersive technology. But what is probably most likely is that the shopping website that we know today will become obsolete. That's pretty certain. I don't like to call the death of things, but this is now end game for what we know as traditional e-commerce. And what's going to happen, it is like a movie. Agents from the matrix are going to turn up and they're going to just do your shopping for you. If you think that this is not too, this is 5-7 years now over the horizon, I think we need to think again. If anybody's used ChatGPT to buy anything and get the best deal, it's only one step away now from just being fully automated.
Introducing Visa Intelligent Commerce, allowing AI to shop and buy. Add, smile, done. It's that simple. You're in control to make the final call. Or you set the limits and let it do the rest. New way to buy, same trusted, secure way to pay. Visa Intelligent Commerce. Use AI to buy.
So AI commerce will be the new front end of retail. Now, Visa are not setting up a front end, but they've they've solved the problem at the back end to automate the payment in a secure and fraud protection sort of way. So it's been solved, and everybody now is lining up to hook into this system today with using large language models in the sort of AI environment, the generative AI environment to sort of grow. There's another piece of the puzzle here is Amazon know this, they've known this for a very long time. They have moved on from the future of front-end shopping. In an AI-first world, they no longer need front-end shopping. So they are trying to own the fulfilment, the logistics, the AI infrastructure behind all of this. That for crying out loud, they're into space and satellite and communications. They're going for sort of some form of e-commerce global domination. So I could only find one photo of Jeff Bezos online about that. So that is definitely what's going on. So this is happening. Characters from the Matrix and some guy from a Bond movie are coming together to make retailers' lives uncomfortable. So where does that fit in with some of the other aspects of the world? So in my mind, media matters. If I'm a retailer, my understanding of media, my capabilities around media are going to be even more important than they were before. And once upon a time, retailers just got to focus with their media strategy what's called bottom of the funnel. We've all heard about the funnel, or the top of funnel, bottom of funnel. We all heard about above the line, below the line. But what is the purpose of media? We ask ourselves that question when 95% of the time everybody's out of market for the product that I'm selling. So there is a thing that you may have heard of, the 95-5 rule, that retailers they're obsessively focused on that 5% of people that are in market, and they're constantly working on closing that gap and getting that deal. But advertisers, big brands, are really focused on the top of the funnel. If they're doing their job right, the content is very different above the line. So awareness is important, but salience now is what is the critical. It's not about relevance, it's about salience. And salience is what happens when the brand comes to mind, when the job is to be done. So it's not about responding to a survey, do you know this brand exists, or who comes top of mind. It's that what happens immediately emotionally. If you're travelling somewhere and you get hungry and you're driving in your car, what pops into your mind? No matter what you think, it's going to be McDonald's probably. Whether you drive past or not, that's what's going to... Their salience in that category is strong. So it's critical. And then putting that salience close to the physical availability of the product is really where the trick is now going forward. So we have above the line and below the line, and that's really the purpose of media. And today we are working with the extension of media, something I call sort of Media 5.0. This is media mastery has to be done on all these things. You can't just be a digital master. You can't just be a print and broadcast master. You have to master all these different evolutions of media. And now there's another one on top of that you've got to get your head around as a retailer, and that's retail media and what are called sort of closed ecosystems. This is where everything's sort of closed off in a sort of, not so much like Meta, but, Amazon ads are with Prime Video, with IMDb, with the Wall Street Journal and all these type of things. They own a media network. It's a closed system. My login for Prime is the same as my login for my Amazon. And anybody that advertises on that Amazon network and has a direct correlation between that media activity, Amazon know who's new to brand, what the incrementality of that advertising is, and they know it instantly. So commerce-driven advertising, that's what retail is sometimes referred to as commerce media, but it's just advertising at the point of sale. But it's about the importance now of the retailer's first-party data and how they integrate that with agency budgets in the future. It's about instant conversion pathways as well. And really at the moment, it's a bit like the grade 8 dance. And I'm going back in time to when I was in grade 8 here. So gender identity was pretty clear, but on one side of the room were the boys and on the other side were the girls. And unfortunately, the boys had to make the first move. But retailers are like the boys in the room and the media agency on the other side. And there's this sort of uncomfortable opaqueness that exists between the two entities at the moment, only because retailers opaquely sort of manage their data and agencies don't necessarily say, well, what do I do with my brand creative in this hovel of a place that snobbery used to sort of play out in. So, and sometimes their clients don't want the two to mix. It's a bit like holy water and tap water in the world. So the papal father gives all the holy water to the brand, and then the tap water has to be spent on watering the garden by the retailers. But now the two can actually come together. So the paradigm shift, it's actually about technology. It's about technology that enables retailers to work with that ecosystem now. And then that allows them to establish different measures for their media performance that are media-centric in order to work out things like incrementality. And then it opens up this new opportunity for what's called new creative grammar. That impact now can be made in the retail environment, that retailers can involve themselves in the concept of saliency for their own businesses. How do they use this sort of new technology, this new creative, to drive more people into their stores and be more relevant at the time when the category comes to mind? So, greater utilisation of a media asset, thinking like a publisher. Higher yields through better measurement and better planning, right up to the media planning stages now, if you're talking to first-party categories and brands, where they're working out ESOV and they're working out the outcomes. These are great opportunities for retailers that they've never even touched before. Obviously, they've got to put the platforms in place. They've got to build the capabilities. A lot of retail media networks now are staffed more by people with media experience than they are with retail experience, and that makes a lot of sense because there's a whole translation problem that has to take place, and the retailer has to make that happen. And that's the ecosystem that we all dealt with. It would take me 15 minutes to explain how all these things to work together to deliver an ad on your Facebook stream in 150 milliseconds. So it's a very, very complex media system, a very complex supply chain. And a retail media network now, as a retailer, has to get mastery of that that ecosystem in order to talk outside their business as well as inside the business. They've got to offer it to their suppliers as well, who are dealing with them for their trade management budgets and other things. And the market in Australia, so there's approximately, I think there's somewhere between $22, $25 billion if you throw catalogues into the mix. And what this is sort of showing is that the higher up is the sort of lower the sort of target value of the audience, and then further to the right means growth. So retail media in that sort of top right-hand corner there is growing from about 1.5 billion last year, and it will grow about another 30% this year in terms of the hypothesis from the people that know. You can see internet, which is everything else around that. It's still about still dominating, and Facebook and Google dominate that space. Connected TV growing, and out of home with a bit of a bullet as well. But the cost per thousand on digital is becoming more challenging, especially in terms of acquisition, in terms of CAC. And these are the businesses that have already stood up retail media works. Long-term ones like Woolworths and Coles, but Amazon's been around forever, but businesses really sort of moving into it. So it's not just about grocery. Sometimes retail media or retailers say, oh, this is all about grocery, isn't it? But it's not. There's very, David Jones doing a fantastic job in terms of including stores in retail media. That might sound strange, but historically retail media has been about your website, and that's pretty much the extent of it because of Amazon. But stores are going to become the next wave of opportunity in retail media. And if you look at the ecosystem historically, online, offline, that's used to be your in-store, out-of-store. That's all we used to have to worry about with e-commerce. But now on-site is what refers to your website. If you hear the terminology on-site, in-store is in your stores, and then off-site is everything that doesn't include in that, and then there's digital off-site, and then there's physical off-site. So digital out-of-home is a good example. And there's this concept of in-centre audience as well. So this is sort of not outside the shopping centres, not inside the store. There is this sort of mediation zone. It's sort of sometimes referred to as audience extension as well. So it's a whole ecosystem now that's coming together as part of that media supply chain. And if we come back and think about sort of Media 5.0 and what that means for retailers, retailers have two other assets that they can play with. They do have their website and own digital, but just remember that's taken over by the matrix very soon. So really what is left over is stores. But stores is media 0.0 for retailers. The stores are the key to this whole puzzle. And if you think if AI and Amazon are going to be dominating, what do retailers actually have to compete? They do have their stores. And stores are media. They're the faces of brands, and rent is advertising. But nobody's doing the equation. Nobody's doing the incrementality metrics on these type of things. Number of impressions that your stores make compared to your TV, to your digital, to everything. It's the equivalent of dropping an atomic bomb and then somebody going and chucking grenades. The incrementality is done by the stores. That's where the damage is done. But creatively now in this space where, in the case of advertising even with AI, through mobile phones and computers are going to be controlled by those AI agents, it's going to be very difficult to get that salience through those mediums as a retail brand. And if you look at what's happening with out-of-home, the outdoor media being the red line there, the orange line, is the growth in outdoor media is also growing at a rapid rate relative to the rest of the market overall. And obviously digital's still growing, but the outdoor media is an interesting thing because it's one of the few one-to-many mediums left now for advertisers due to the decline of high-reach mediums like TV because of that time engaged. So new grammar comes into play. In-store signage that takes into account, it's part of that ecosystem. This is like an extension of digital out of home, but it's in a retailer store in a category. And the grammar here is a form of branding that also serves the retailer's needs or the shopper's needs in terms of wayfinding in the store. But when you get to that zone, I can tell you what, Bombay Sapphire, it looks like they're converting a lot there. And if the retailer is then offering that out to this is not sort of trade money, this is agency money that's been driven because of the creative. There's no way the sales team are coming up with that creative. That's happening back at agency land. And that's being fed into that system. And guess what? No way Bombay Sapphire's agency wants to let that go next week if they're managing incrementality across a fleet. But there's something even bigger here that's coming into play. And retail media then becomes something of a different equation for retailers if they want to think about it more. And this evolution from what is historically been known as theatrical retail to cinematic retail. And I didn't even have to go around, I just had to walk up the road to see probably one of the best examples of what I see as cinematic retail media in the country right now. It's happening in a Mecca store at Melbourne Central. And what they've done is they've built, as an extension of their leasehold, it's adjacent to their leasehold, this sort of brand inspiration space. And they turn it over quite regularly. But it's a fully digitally rendered store. There's no real fixtures and anything. It's just screens and other renders, and they turn this over quite regularly. So you can see in terms of the impact of that, it's going beyond just a display, a branded display. This is immersive cinematic retail. And that is what is being offered by the new retail media. And as you can see, it's adjacent to that as well. And the turning over, offering that to brands as an investment is very powerful for the brands to create saliency. That's not about curating something to people that are in market, that's generating traffic. So in terms of retail media being a new sort of impact creative, how then do you need to think about investing in that around customers? And this is where I get a bit old and crotchety, around customer strategy. I find myself, the older I get, I find myself yelling at the TV a lot more because things that just always have made sense have been changing. And I'm going to make a confession, but you know, I find myself, one of the TV shows that I found myself yelling at the TV a lot was Married at First Sight. And that's only because of research, obviously, because it's Baudrillard, simulacra and simulation and all these type of postmodern problems. But I found myself yelling at the TV, "You're not married!" And it's like that when I hear marketers talk around customer strategy. I feel like yelling, that's not strategy. It's just tactics. And I know that it's just tactics when I hear, oh, our target is millennials, or our targets are 18 to 24-year-olds, our targets are baby boomers. It means they've done no thinking about it. There's no cohesion in that group when it comes to targeting and market segmentation. Another one is sort of these segments that I could say the same to that segment and I can say the same to that and I'm going to get the same result. There's overlapping, hey, aren't they in that one and in that one as well? Inaccessible. Well, who are these people? What's this definition about their lifestyle? But we can't even find them with media, or we don't even know where they live. And then businesses with their data start to make up segments. They become even more fictional, like signs of the zodiac. And then they all sort of match up, and they're evenly populated against their value and their size. And there's this thing that people start doing, I call it nose counting. They start just counting noses. If you think about retailers' capability or marketing capabilities, there's the bean counters and there's the head shrinkers and now there's the nose counters. And all they're doing is just saying this many of the population. What about looking in their wallet? What does share of wallet look like? So a lot of segmentation now has no share of wallet. So it's impossible to work out the topography of value. And then retailers are doing these things where they're totally obsessed by loyalty plans, personalisation and these type of things. These are great things for retention and leveraging margin and supplier support, but they've got nothing, there's no empirical connection between loyalty and growth. That means there is no strategy around customer acquisition. And so these are the things that really really challenge me from a strategy point of view. But we're retail media and customer management office. So there's the famous Sun Tzu saying, tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. But there's another chapter of the art of war, even before this, and that is about terrain. That unless you have a map of the terrain, then you can't even start your strategy. And it's important to think about segmentation and diagnosis of the research phase, particularly if you're building media models for that. And you really do need a three-dimensional picture of the terrain in segment modelling. And one of the sort of dimensions of that is being able to find segments and then look at their share of category, being able to then associate that share of wallet that you have, including zero share of wallet, and also something called category entry points and motivators that are unique to your category, what's driving it. And then you can cut a very sort of powerful three-dimensional view or segment of your market, just from secondary research even, with people like with businesses like Roy Morgan that have that information, but bringing it all together. And what, historically I've sort of got a sort of a fascination with the neo-consumer typology, because they meet all the criteria of throwing a segment at each, what category, and whether it's hardware or appliances or whatever. They really stand out as being 24% of the population, but they're 54% of the value overall. This is very ubiquitous across all categories in discretionary, not staples, not grocery, but in terms of discretionary categories, this plays out pretty evenly no matter what category you're in. So your ability to cut and dice it is a bit like a shortcut. That's what I found. If you're trying to put together a retail media strategy, but then you're trying to define an audience for an agency, you need somewhere to start. You need to cut and dice a market segment to show and appetise your audience for those advertisers, just like a publisher would. But this is a great shortcut, I suppose, in terms of what's already out there. And they're very influential as well. What makes the top of the funnel, that arrowhead, powerful, the Neo arrowhead, is it's very influential on other categories because they talk to strategy. And in many ways, they're higher LTV and they're lower cost to acquire overall. They might be more expensive to reach, but they convert at a much higher rate. So they talk well to strategy. They're measurable, they're substantial, they're disproportionate, and that 24-54 ratio is powerful. They're accessible, they're differentiable. The traditionals and neos respond differently to different creatives, to different mediums. They're very actionable, especially around geography as well. And in the retail environment, where do you sit with your customer focus maturity? Because a lot of people say, oh yeah, we're focused on the customers, but it probably just means you're focused on customer satisfaction. There's different stages of retail focus or customer focus. And most good retail business will be able to tick the top two, that in terms of reducing complaints, improving satisfaction. Some are moving to integration, which is that proper unification of the physical and digital brand experience, and that are really thinking about driving acquisition. But at a strategic level, you're really thinking about what's called the human experience now. So this is customer experience, so CX, to something called the human experiences, which will be driven by AI to a large extent in the overall. So it's very similar to e-commerce, maybe 20 years ago. I'm showing my age a bit. I mean, we were talking about digital in 2003 at JB and commerce, but AI is moving 4 times faster. So what would take 2 years is going to take place nearly in 6 months. So it's important to have that sort of strategic approach. And so if we come back to all those sort of facets of capabilities, how do I use my capabilities to address these factors? Then what I like about Media 5.0 or the retail media component is it talks to the mastery of that capability in media, which is going to matter. And it touches all those competencies. It touches trust, it touches stores, it touches cost of doing business, it's tech adoption, and it's got to be focused around customers. There's so much talk around retail media about the revenue and how much extra business, and nobody mentions the customer experience. And how, as a retailer, if it was any use to me as a retailer, then I wouldn't need all this advertisers' money. I'd be able to use this capability to generate more traffic. I sort of would have to almost prove that I don't need this money. It's a bit like going to the bank for a loan. If you can prove to the bank you don't need the money, bang, you've got the loan. And that's what retail media is a bit like. You've got to be able to prove that you don't need the advertisers to make it work. And then you've got a business. And then the Neo segment mapping gives you that terrain. That's the opportunity, is to be able to map the terrain, go after it with those priorities. And it forces you to focus not on what to do, but on what not to do. And that's the key to strategy. Strategy is deciding what not to do. And it is about saying no, it's about focus and sacrificing things that you think matter and then putting those priorities into place. These two sort of things sort of come together to help provide some clarity, Michelle, if that helps you. Otherwise, it's total chaos anyway. So, thank you.
As a segue, obvious segue from what Scott's been talking about, Scott used Neos at JB Hi-Fi to take it from, as Michelle said, a relatively small music store to the retail giant it is today. And he's talked about Neos, and we thought it would be the perfect opportunity to bring them together. So we've got a powerful vision of what retail media looks like: predictive, physical, programmatic, invisible. In a word, it's complicated, but no matter how sharp the tech stack is, it only works when it's pointed at the right customer. And that's where the NEO, or the next economic order, comes in. Retail media is an ecosystem filled with automation and intelligence, as we've said, making it a complex target. Australians with a NEO mindset, and this is a mindset, this isn't a conventional, traditional customer segmentation, this is a way of thinking, are the arrowhead, to use Scott's introduction. Driving innovation, influencing culture, and reshaping what value means. This is the mindset that should be at the centre of every future-facing success strategy. NEO started as a spark in my imagination, but what makes them powerful is science. So neuroscience reveals what moves them, the emotional cues. Behavioural science shows how to nudge them to move in your direction and do what you desire them to do. And propensity pinpoints where they intend to spend their money next. There's no point looking at where they've been. We should be looking at what people would love to do next. So this is the difference between the transactional and behavioural data that we're all obsessed with currently and thinking about where would they love to go next. But let's zero in on money. NEOs make up just a quarter of the population, as we heard, but they drive the majority of consumer spending. They don't just buy more, they buy more often. And as anyone who has done any kind of yield modelling knows, that frequency is a critical element of yield model. In fact, 90% of these NEOs sit in Roy Morgan's big spender category. That's the top third of elective or discretionary spenders in the economy. And that's what makes them the right customers. Sure, everyone wants the best price. Everyone wants the best price. For non-NEOs, for the traditionals, it all starts and ends with price. But for NEOs, price is just the cost of falling in love. NEOs are early adopters, but more importantly, they're the future shapers. They don't just try new things, they become brand advocates when something clicks emotionally. And that matters because NEOs respond to brands emotionally, not just rationally. That emotional response drives loyalty, lifetime value, but is critical in acquisition. With 5.5 million of them in Australia, they're not just more valuable, they're more contagious. And when we think about the funnel, there needs to be emotional triggers for every customer at the top of the funnel. By the time we get to the bottom of the funnel, the emotional triggers still need to be there for NEOs, but for traditionals, it's become rational at the bottom of the funnel. For NEOs, they're treated like everyone else, and they're confronted with rational arguments. That's completely the wrong way to approach them. These traditionals represent half the population, and they're wired very differently. Their decisions are conservative, much more risk-averse, and heavily price-driven. Even a wealthy traditional still shops on price. The value to a brand comes from volume and predictability. They're important to brands, but not passion, loyalty, or growth. In a retail media world built on precision and emotional resonance, that's a mismatch. Neos and traditionals are so completely different that they may as well be on two completely different planets. Let's explore why. This is what the neo mindset looks like in the wild. They plan, they entertain, they explore, they take calculated risks, they value ideas, and they're proud to lead. These aren't just lifestyle preferences, they're commercial signals. Neos want the best, they yearn for quality, and they're willing to pay for it. Because success, experience, and originality matter so much more than just saving a few dollars for a neo. And here's the flip side. The 11.5 million traditional Australians with a traditional mindset resist change, avoid risk, and view price as the ultimate goal. They're more sceptical, less emotionally driven, and far more likely to resist change and resist innovation, even when they have money. So the whole notion that affluence is a proxy for value is false. Even if they have money, they don't respond the same way. These aren't bad customers, they're just not the right customers for brands trying to lead, inspire, or critically to grow. And all this, despite what I'd like you to believe, isn't academic. Through Roy Morgan's single source, we identify native neos across the country for planning, buying, and brand strategy. And through Axiom, we activate 5.2 million digital neos across Meta and programmatic via the trade desk. So the neo mindset isn't just insightful, it's fully targetable. This is 5.2 million fully addressable audiences of one. And it's at scale with surgical precision, and it's available right now. It's worth noting that the neo typology has been used across a wide range of brands, not just for targeting, but for deeper decision-making. Some use it to sharpen their customer strategy, others to differentiate their propositions, and still others to improve conversion rates or boost loyalty. The point is that this isn't confined to one part of the marketing funnel. For example, when a global bank stopped targeting everyone and focused only on neos, and that's a matter of determining what not to do, when they focused only on neos, here's what happened. In the first 30 days, activation lifted by 68% and cost per acquisition dropped by more than 75%. Same platforms, same tools, same budget, just the right customer. And it didn't stop there. Over the next 9 months, retention improved by 34% and the lifetime value to acquisition cost ratio reached 4.1. Simply put, each customer brought in 4 times what it cost to acquire them, making the sweet spot in the LTV to CAC universe. This is just one example of the rewards on offer through emotional alignment, not just reach, demographics, or lookalikes. And it's not just local. The neo mindset's been explored, published, and applied across markets in the US, here in Australia, and globally, because the underlying forces, emotion, identity, aspiration, they're not regional, they're human. A neo in Shanghai thinks and behaves much like a neo in San Francisco or Melbourne, and they're shaping the next wave of consumer behaviour everywhere. So in conclusion, neos are the retail media arrowhead. That's not just because they're here now, but because they're already scanning for what's next and how they're going to change and how they're going to create change, act early, and spend where meaning resides. Retail media isn't about reaching more customers, it's about reaching the right customers. So for retail media to deliver on its promise, it needs more than reach. It needs resonance, cohesion, and surgical precision. And that all starts with the right customer. Welcome to Planet Neo. Thank you.
So it's your turn. Any questions from the audience? Let's open the floor to your questions.
My name is Vaz Banchikov. I just wanted to get a better understanding the concept of Neo. You spoke about it in retail. I was wondering what the impact of that is on the B2B business.
Thank you. That's a great question. One of my clients was Moet Hennessy, part of LVMH, and they had no relationship directly with customers. They were a B2B, so they sold to liquor retailers, and the liquor retailer had the relationship with the customers. But we did this intermediation thing where we actually developed a whole strategy to have the customers falling in love with the brands that they had and coming into retailers asking for them. There's a thing about, I said that everyone wants the best price. A Neo might go into Dan Murphy, for example, and might say, I want Moet Hennessy, given Moet and Chandon, the champagne, given that particular client. And they'll go there because they've fallen in love with it with the brand before they ever went to the retailer. Okay? But they're going to the retailer to get the best price because everyone wants the best price. So there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas a traditional would walk into the retailer and say, I've got $200 to spend, how can I get the most bang for the buck? And that's the difference. So you're able to actually reach and influence the consumer that then, in turn, comes back and influences the brands.
Thanks, Ross. Any other questions?
Hi.
A question down here?
Yes, I have a question. So I know it was mentioned earlier that Neos don't particularly sit in specific or particular demographics, but do you see whether there are demographics that have majority or have more Neos than others? And with that, are there particular product categories or services that seem to be more of interest to these Neo customers?
There are no demographic inputs into the algorithm, the 194 variables in the algorithm that determines who's a Neo. But there are, of course, behavioural outputs. So in other words, the algorithm then spits it out and I can say, well, how old are these Neos? And I can tell you that I'm extremely old. I'm well into my 70s and I'm a quintessential Neo. But then so is someone who's 32. Having said that, they skew more towards younger. So there are more 25 to 50-year-old Neos than there are 60 to 80-year-old Neos. But don't imagine that they're Neos because they're younger. They just happen to be younger Neos. And don't think that they earn more, that what they earn defines them as Neos. They earn more because they're Neos. So all of that kind of demographic stuff is really essential to be able to find them, track them, target them, influence them and everything else. But it does not identify who they are.
And Ross, one of the most frustrating things we find is when people say we're talking about young people, we have to get on with the young generation, and then they describe the young generation as if they are all Neo, as if they're all leaning into the future, unafraid, spending, etc. And they've totally confused Neo with age. Very dangerous.
There are about 2 million millennials in Australia, and there are about 1.8 million neo-millennials and about 2.4 or something traditional millennials. The neo-millennials, 90% of them are in the big spender category. The traditional millennials, 11% are in the big spender category. So, there is no cohesion.
You must have been looking at the Roy Morgan data, Ross.
Every single day, Michelle.
Every single day. That's what I like to hear. There was a question down here. Can we have the microphone there?
Hi. To follow on from the demographic question, is there any geographic, with Neos and specifically, I'm assuming they probably skew more to metro areas, but would be interested to know.
They are urban, so there's no question. They really over-index for urban environments. But with one of the great tools that I've been able to use in the work that I do in partnership with Roy Morgan is their live mapping tool, or what I like to call Neo Geo.
He took our live mapping tool and rebranded it Neo Geo.
But we can actually identify where Neos are anywhere in Australia, down to street level, and this has just become the most incredible tool for identifying where the next store should be, where the next brand should be, where to do micro marketing, local area marketing, all that kind of stuff. So yes, they are heavily skewed towards urban, but if you look at a map of one of the Roy Morgan tool maps of Melbourne and then overlay onto that Bunnings stores, for example, you can see that there are about 4 Bunnings stores that probably are where they shouldn't be, or 6 JB Hi-Fi stores that would be better if they weren't there, but they were there. So yes, geography is important, but once again, it's a consequence of what the intelligence tells us.
Can I come back to, I know we could talk about Neos forever, can I come back to the whole retail media area? Because clearly it's rapidly growing. And I imagine anyone in the retail space is thinking, gosh, should I be in that? What do I do? How do I get there? So I'm really interested, Scott, what would you say is the single biggest mistake that retailers would make navigating this area of retail media?
Probably the biggest mistake is they don't understand media. They don't understand the ecosystem that exists around it. They're sort of institutionalised in their own sort of environment with trade. And that's a general statement. So some retailers are more hip to it than others. But and then sort of taking the organisation on the journey takes a lot of time. Especially if there's a huge tech stack issue involved. Thinking of their retail media assets as inventory assets. They understand inventory, so sometimes it's about taking them on the journey to sort of say, well, you understand, you wouldn't do non-productive inventory with all this stuff that you're investing in. So how do you treat that? So
Scott, I thought you might have talked a little bit about trust, because essentially if you take your inventory, which might be a customer list or whatever, and you start advertising things on it that people are uncomfortable with, I'm sure that's not good for your brand. And at the end of the day, you're probably trying to make sure, and this is what all of those spinning wheels were about, is to make sure that once you start doing retail media, you're building your brand. You're not devaluing the brand.
You have to explore though. You have to, but you don't want to go too far off piste, is to put it that way. But you can sort of you can go into different areas because of it. That's where the customer strategy really comes into it, and how people do relate to your brand. As long as the intent and the integrity is right, and you are trying to add value to sort of a component-based aspect. So I think there's a lot of nervousness around what's called the near endemic or the non-endemic space, as it's referred to. That's the people that you don't trade with. But it's about exploring that, understanding that, working, and then it can also talk to assortment back into it. If there are non-endemic opportunities, then but they are adjacent, then what's going on with this product portfolio or this assortment as well? So it is a sort of a three-dimensional problem, I think. But trust, it's even with mobile, even with websites, you don't want that to be too frictional. I mean, not 70 or 80% of your traffic's on mobile. You don't want pop-up ads and all these or display ads going out of control.
It's one of the big dangers, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's sort of customer experience is key, and trust is about that. But if it looks as though you're just trying to sort of mine them for advertising dollars, then it'll stand out pretty quickly. Yeah.
One of the other things that I loved about what you were talking about, first of all, when you talked about rent is part of your marketing. That's a great line and a really important one. But for me, more important than that is the fact that you say stores are so important. And I think for most of us, the feeling is that stores are on their way out, bricks and mortar, the pressure against stores. You're shaking your head. But it's really, really good to hear that. What practical first steps should a retailer then be taking to get the value out of that store?
Yeah, well, some stores are just so badly designed they don't really attach to it. And
so they should call you?
No, so I'm not a good store designer either. But in terms of, you've got to think longer term. You've got to think about the stores as a form of retailers think they're attracting people in store, but think about the 95% of people that aren't in the market and how you're talking to them to make your stores interesting to them. And then you've got to look at the whole taxonomy of that store environment. So it is a medium to long-term issue for a lot of retailers. It's very topical around the world now, where people are scrambling to think about it. But there's probably not too much of a rush if you're on the journey, because you've got to stand up the tech, you've got to build the people capability. The measurement is critical. You need to be able to do, test and learn very fast before you start going and making $100 million capital investments as well. So it's a bit of a catch-22, yeah.
Any thoughts from the audience? This is an audience that knows a lot about this space. We've got somebody up here, then I'll come back to you.
G'day, great presentation, Scott. Just talking about stores as you were there, it immediately made me think of Minority Report. Tom Cruise walking through the shopping centre and all the stores are advertising directly at him. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but...
yeah, I have seen that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that possibility. Yeah. Do you think stores will do that?
Oh, look, there's a lot of talk about BCI, which is human interface for advertising. That's a bit further down the track, but I chose the Matrix because it's a little bit more relevant to agents. But how advertising is going to play out in that sort of what's called post-humanism, that is apparently going to replace postmodernism, then that's a scary time. Yeah, but I haven't designed an app for that yet, so I don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
In terms of the retail media that you were referring to, are you talking about retailer going to supplier and asking them for support in advertising and marketing? Is that what we're referring to?
Well, there's retailers already. Most retailers have a pretty big bucket of money that's part of their terms with suppliers, so they ask them for money. Well, some retailers don't necessarily ask for money; they tell them to give them the money. But in terms of the merchandise team, there is that trade bucket, that trade spend. But there is the brand business, the 95%, the awareness and the salience budgets of brands does exist, but that's in the agency ecosystem. And the challenge is, where do those two things meet and how do they meet in the retail environment? Historically, there used to be, brands used to be quite snobbish about having their brand creative appearing in, God forbid, a retail environment. So they'd rather just sort of have it outside the store. But now it's that sort of mixing of the creatives that provides the real opportunity for what is the key aspect for brands, which is salience. Salience is the key measure in brand effects. So retailers have to go and talk to their brands through the agencies. And in Australia, depending on which category you're in, the agencies are very influential because it's pretty much controlled by the big four, becoming the big three. So that influence and that thinking at the very high level is taking place. And people are starting to realise, a bit like the grade 8 dance, we're moving on. So, but retailers have to ask brands for money, but more often than not, they need to sort of appetise media agencies with their brand planning in that. And that's very complex when you've never done it.
Hi, I'm Melissa from David Jones. I have a question that covers two topics, I think, that we've spoken about that I've been thinking about since this topic was announced. We talked a lot in the past on NEOs and, don't advertise to me. You're screaming, but I can't hear you, which has stuck with me for a very long time, Ross. And in the retail media landscape, if you've got them on your website, if you've got them in your store, they've accepted that this is now something they maybe have fallen in love with. They're part of that world. Serving endemic adjacent or non-endemic advertising in those spaces for a NEO, do you think they're going to be more receptive? Is that more effective advertising? Is that something that we're looking at, because they're already in that environment as opposed to outdoor or just a blatant ad? We used to focus a lot on earned to overcome that. Or is there a risk that it's still the same and actually you're sort of damaging their love affair with you because they're like, oh, you're advertising to me now, that's disgusting. Is there a view on that sort of advertising effectiveness within retail media for a NEO yet?
I think I'll let Scott answer that, but before he does, I'll say it entirely depends how much they love what you're doing. So if you're there and you're being blatant and you're offering just price, discount, rational arguments, not beauty and elegance and sophistication and nuance, then yes, you are going to deeply offend them. When I did all that work with David Jones all those years ago, the then CEO said, I see a whole bunch of people come in. We know Neos are our core customer base. But when we've got sales on, all these other people come in and I don't recognise them. He said, how are we able to reconcile that, of those people being there and advertising to them on discounts and price? We have 4 sales a year in those days. And he said, how does that reconcile? And that's really what we worked on. And the reality is that Neos just don't notice that stuff, but they notice the stuff that attracts them. The traditionals don't notice the stuff that, there's this kind of consumer blindness between the two types. But you can still... Traditionals will go where Neos go, but Neos rarely go where traditionals go. So you're much better having a value proposition for the Neos, Scott.
I think he's saying don't put traditional advertising in David Jones. Or do it very carefully.
Yeah, I think I put up those 2 examples, one of an in-store piece with the gin. That's a different sort of creative, that grammar, I sort of try to refer to it as. And I showed that Mecca example. And you guys are doing it well, in a sense of just even the fragrance plimps or something like that are in that drive aisle as you walk through a store. That's retail media, but that's been done in a way that's very, it brings lustre and conviction to purpose. I think that's really, when retail media works, it works like propaganda because it brings lustre and conviction to purpose. So that is like art. So there's a new creative grammar, and that's where I think the agencies are going to be very important. They have to get their skates on because the brands are so far behind in thinking about this, ultimately. The brands are the problem in a sense of building these campaigns. They're in a paradigm, and so there's just going to be this shift in thinking, but creative. There'll be new formats, different signage formats, different integrated displays. That's probably the best industry that's showing advancement is digital out of home. It's flying. And I think that in-store media just has to take a cue from that, yeah.
Oh, there's another question, is there? Okay.
Thank you.
And then I'll use that's a wrap slide.
Last one. Hi, how are you doing? Thanks so much for your presentation. My name's Benny. I had a question sort of to do with media. I was wondering how Neos respond to storytelling when a store is used as the site of that storytelling. Not so much with what you were discussing with Mecca, how it's that interactive physical, but when you use video and that's displayed in a digital medium, if you feature the store as kind of almost a character in that storytelling, how Neos might respond to that.
I'm not quite sure how that would play out exactly. So if I have to think about what format. So if you're talking about in-store, that creative coming through, or using the store in a creative in another way as the subject. I guess talking about the store as the subject of the creative. I probably wouldn't do that. I think it sort of loses itself. I mean, retailers are just agents of consumers, and I think when you sort of feature the store, but there are mediums like JB Hi-Fi has a good example where they do these sort of YouTube clips on Facebook and things like that, where they're sort of curating something in terms of their own media space, and that's where the store's involved, but it's a little bit more lower funnel. I think from an inspirational point of view, for salience, I mean, Ross, we used to have a big debate because I don't think people really care about brands at the end of the day. I think they're somewhat ambivalent to brands, so the concept of brand love and that sort of, used to have a debate, and JB Hi-Fi was pretty good at screaming down your TV, but definitely we were talking to traditionals with our TV strategy or our radio strategy, and then our websites and other things, and our stores were all about the actual Neos themselves in terms of the location and the impact and the assortment, and we chose brands like Apple when nobody wanted to deal with them and stuff like that. So,
and they weren't big boxes; they all had rooms.
Yeah, there was pokey little things. There still are, but in some cases. But yeah, look, I think making the subject the hero of the narrative, it's bad storytelling. If you look at the protagonist in the story needs still to be the customer. The customer has to be the hero in this environment. Yeah.
I just have, Michelle, I know you want to wrap up, but every time I do this, someone says, can a traditional become a neo? Or can a neo become a traditional? And the answer is no. So, you know, pretty much you're born one and you stay that way for the whole of your life. The second question is, what if does a neo marry a neo, or can a neo marry a traditional? And I can tell you that sometimes it works. Largely we're all self-selecting in life, so it's better that you marry a neo. But women, a female neo who marries a traditional husband, it can be quite handy because she determines what they're going to buy and then sends him out to get the bargain, to get the best deal for it. I was telling this to a client, the whole group were doing a big workshop, and one of the guys started laughing and he said, I'm the traditional in the marriage. I said, tell me the story. She sent me out to buy a new lawnmower. He said, yes, I know. She decided which one we were going to buy. Yes, yes, yes. But anyway, she sent me out to buy a lawnmower and I came back with two. I said, what? A, why? And B, what are you going to do with two lawnmowers? And he said, well, I'll answer A. It was such a bargain. I just simply couldn't resist it. And as for what I'm going to do with two lawnmowers, I have absolutely no idea.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Scott. That was fabulous. Thanks, Ross. So we've heard a lot about the powerful yet complex world of retail media. Keep talking. And at Roy Morgan, we try and simplify that complexity, turn it into something extremely valuable, revenue. And at Roy Morgan, everything starts with the customer. And I think despite the fact that we've looked at this from a retail perspective, from a supplier's perspective, from a media perspective, at the end of the day, there's a customer in there making decisions, and there's the customer in there that has to get value from all the parts of this ecosystem. And so thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hang around, talk to these people. You'll get lots of great insight from them. But thank you all very much for coming.